I like to differentiate between moon logic
Okay.
and cartoon logic. Moon logic, people use disparagingly, and it's stuff that just makes no sense whatsoever. And then the person in the future who's in the same location but 200 years in the future, can go up to that dryer, take it out, and it's shrunk so much it now fits a
Oh,
hamster.
nice.
And I love that puzzle. I think it's great. It's silly, obviously, and wouldn't work in real life, but it's got a cartoon logic to it.
Hello everyone, my name is Łukasz and this is the Game Engineering Podcast. This time I'm joined by Will, who is working on a mystery game, City of Voices. He's also a writer and a designer for The Rise of the Golden Idol and upcoming DLC. Join us for a discussion on what makes a game mystery exciting. Tell me a little bit about City of Voices.
So, City of Voices is a game I'm making with in collaboration with a pixel artist called Matt Frith, and it's a Golden Idol like, so a deduction game where you kind of see these frozen in time moments, and you click around the screen. You can get more information about the clues you're clicking on, see what people are saying at that moment in time, what they're carrying in their pockets, and then you have to kind of figure out via deduction what has happened in that scene. And usually there's some kind of twist or something where things aren't quite as they first seem. Um, yeah, so it's very inspired by the Golden Idol games. So anyone who's played those will have some idea of what I'm talking about. But rather than being all about kind of murders and sinister cults, which those games tend to be, this is more a sort of heartfelt tale, or at least that's what it's aiming to be. It's about a young girl called Rosie who is getting bullied on her first day at secondary school. And she sort of retreats into herself a bit, and but she does end up on a very sort of fantastical adventure, which we haven't really described yet in any marketing materials or anything. But so it does take this fantastical turn, even though it starts out as a kind of slice of life story.
Okay. So, uh, yeah, we'll probably compare this a little bit to Golden Idol. And Golden Idol is like the mystery is, let's say, tied to the criminal, criminal aspects of life and things. How do
Mm.
you then, what the mysteries will be revolving around, if it's not trying to be like dark?
Yeah. So in the first Golden Idol game in particular, almost, if not every scenario involved a murder. So as you say, you've got a very obvious uh, setup for a mystery there. Who did it? How did they do it? Whereas we have, so in the slice of life section of the game that it begins with, they're kind of more everyday mysteries. And yes, they're not as dramatic as a murder, but I hope they're still fun and the deductions are still as clever. That's what I hope so. So, for example, there's a scenario that takes place when they're out on a camping trip with like their equivalent of scouts, and I think it's different in America, so I don't know where it is. If you were ever in, how it is with scouts in Poland or wherever you grew up. But in England, you the flag is kind of knotted up in a bunch at the top of the pole, and then you pull a string and it unfurls. And so someone's done that. Rosie unfurls the thing, and someone's drawn a butt on it, and it says Rosie's big butt. And so it's like the girls bullying them. And so the mystery there is who did it? How did they get away with it when supposedly the flag was being guarded at all times?
Ah, okay,
That kind of thing.
okay, okay. So where are you at in terms of the game development?
So it's going to be 9 scenarios in total, and we've developed the first 3 fully, um, including with music and art assets and all the necessary UI and stuff like that. We've planned out the story for the whole game, and we're currently developing the fourth scenario, which is it will be straight after the demo, and that's where we start taking this fantastical turn.
So you have now like the full scenario, like story for the entire game, and
Yes.
it's roughly 9 chapters, and then
Mhm.
3 of them are fleshed out, and the work is happening on the fourth.
Yeah, that's right. Although the subject, the story, I imagine, will kind of morph a bit as we go. But we know we're happy with the story at the moment, but things will probably change.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Uh, how? What is then the inspiration for the scenes and story? Where do you draw from?
I think I think both Matt and I were. I think we have a similar sensibility in that we quite like these slice of life kind of stories uh, in games that feel quite comfortable and cozy. Um, but then we also knew that we wanted to have something that felt a bit more strange and mysterious because this is a sort of this genre of game lends itself to being mysterious, of course. So some of the inspirations we drew from were books we read in our childhood. I was a particular fan of the Just Williams series of books, and Matt was into the Famous Five books. I don't know if you're familiar. I think these are both
Fam-
very English things.
Famous
Uh,
Five?
yeah, so I'm not as familiar with the Famous Five, but they're sort of a group of five kids who uh, go on adventures to like they've heard that some pirate's treasure is buried on an island
Okay.
near where they're staying with their aunt for the summer holidays or
Okay.
something. And so they go off looking for it and they get into kind of hairy scrapes and adventures, but none of them are getting murdered. Like it's,
Okay. None of them sacrificed for weird causes.
yeah, they might narrowly escape getting sacrificed,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Okay. So what makes for a good mystery? I was thinking about this like beforehand because like both Golden Idol and this game will be quite different, but they all revolve around mystery. So like you probably have seen during your work on Golden Idol game uh
Mm.
something that like really caught your eye and like, oh, I want to do this, I want to pursue this. What would be the good mystery?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there are two levels to it with a game like a Golden Idol like game. There's the mysteries that are individually contained within each scenario, like who murdered this guy and how did he get away with it or whatever. And then there's the mystery of the whole overarching story. Um, and actually, I remember a YouTube video that I watched of someone who was not criticizing the case of the Golden Idol, but he was saying he loved the game, but actually there's no mystery to the story. Like there's lots of mysteriousness in that there's this strange Golden Idol that does all sorts of strange things we don't see in our world. Um, and there's a big twist, but you could argue that there's not a question that's burning in you from the beginning to the end, like who did this big plot point. Whereas with individual scenarios, there definitely are. Um, and so I think our game is somewhat similar in that there's a lot of mysterious stuff going on, and it is kind of a mystery in the overarching story for the player to work out um like what's really going on here, what's real and what's not is going to be a question, and how do things in the fantastical parts of the story relate to things in the more slice of life parts of the story. but within individual scenarios, there's definitely a mystery. And I think what makes a good mystery in those cases is it needs to be, I think, fairly fairly clear what the dilemma is. Usually, I love it when something seemingly impossible has happened, like a locked room mystery or something, like someone's murdered in a locked room. Where did the killer go? Um, and obviously, we don't have killers and stuff in ours, and not every mystery is an impossible thing. But I'm just really into them, and I've been influenced by like TV shows like Jonathan Creek and Monk do things like that a lot. Um, yeah, what else makes for a good mystery? I don't know. I guess it just it has to tie in closely with the story and feel natural and not like a mystery for a mystery's sake. Um, yeah, I mean, generally, I guess you kind of know it when you see it, and when we first come up with a concept for any individual scenario, we will make a super scrappy version of it. Just I'll draw it with my terrible drawing skills in a paint program, and I'll show it to someone and just say, "Tell me what you think's going on here." And this is stolen directly from how we do things at Color Gray Games, and kind of taking their workflow. Um, and one of the main things we're looking for is just, is the person interested in what's going on here? Do they
Yeah.
actually care? Like, they might not be able to answer the question, what's going on here? How did the person do it? But do they actually want to know? And if they do, that's a good sign.
No,
And
that's great. That's great. Like, first of all, you immediately playtest things and you
oh,
wait for, like, look for interest and like excitement.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the second of all, yeah, I think like this is genius. Like, if if there is a mystery, for example, there's like everybody's on the train and somebody got murdered, you
Yeah.
kind of know that, oh well, someone was on this train, right?
Mm,
So the killer is on the train. But if
yeah.
something like almost impossible happens,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, but how was this possible? Not only like who did it, but like how he did it or she did it, so that like it's almost as if it's not possible. Like
Yeah.
this now
That
now it's excitement like all of a sudden.
Yeah, that as I say is what I really love. Actually, so I'm with Color Gray. I'm currently working on the second DLC that's going to be coming out for the Rise of the Golden Idol. There are four in total, and I'm kind of taking the lead on the second one. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in the second one. There's a lot of, yeah, seemingly impossible stuff, and hopefully that's what grips you, because yeah, you think, well, I thought everyone was in the back carriage of the train watching this presentation that was going on, or eating dinner or something. I've got confirmation of that. So how did this person die in the front carriage? And then you realize, I don't know, someone had some strange contraption that shot a poison dart from a clock when it chimed 12 or something, like, if it's a sort of Agatha Christie type novel.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, we can turn a little bit maybe to the Golden Idol and your work as a writer for this type of game. Can you
Sure.
like paint a picture how it looks like to work as a writer for this type of game where there's a lot of writing, but it also needs to be very carefully worded, not to like
Yeah.
spoil, and how your day looks like in general.
Sure. So I'm credited as a writer in the game, and we sort of we wondered what us writers should be credited as, because like, we also spend most of our time designing the scenarios themselves. So I'd like to call myself a writer designer, but actually in my contract with Color Gray, I think Latvia didn't have like their version of HMRC in the UK, or like the tax office didn't have a category that was games designer. So I think my contract says I'm a screenwriter or something. But yes, so Andreas and Ernest primarily write the overarching story. Although we do have, me and the other writers do have some hand in that. And then we get given a particular scenario to work on. And each scenario also has its own sort of mini story, like um, such and such stabbed someone with a knife, and then he went and hid the knife under the floorboards, and he misdirected. This isn't a real scenario because I don't want to give spoilers, but yeah, you have to write out a story just beat by beat for what happened, and then normally we'll show that to Ernest and Andreas, and Ernest in particular will tear it to shreds. He'll say, "This bit doesn't make sense. Like, oh, why would the killer have gone here? Or wouldn't someone have seen him? Why would he have done this? It would have been so much easier for him to do this." And that's a really useful part of the process because you need that story to be watertight, uh, because otherwise players are going to be players will realize, and it will just feel silly to them. Like the mystery, yeah, the mystery has to make concrete, logical sense. So we write that story beat by beat, and then we start making the game on paper, or at least this is how we started off doing it. We sort of draw sketches of the background we want, and also all the close-ups, and they're just kind of, they're in a program like Milanote, or I think Myra or Miro or something is another one like that, one of these online kind of planning programs. And yeah, we kind of play the game on paper with, again, testing it on a couple of people. These days, because our programmer guy Richard has set up such good systems for us to use, is actually just as easy for us to slap it in the engine immediately. So we do that. But in terms of writing dialogue and kind of the stuff that's in written materials like letters that you see, I yeah, it's a fine line between making it sound natural and making sure the clues are in there, because we try to be as concise as possible, because players don't like to read. It turns out, like if a player clicks on a clue and it's a letter that's like 2 pages long, they just like, you just hear them audibly go, "Oh my god!" And also they don't retain the information. Yeah, visual clues are much more fun than written stuff. I tend to try to write things as naturally as possible for the scenario and the character, and then see what's missing that I need to somehow crowbar in somewhere, like which clues need to be shoved in.
Can you at what point in the process can you like turn something that is written into a visual clue?
Um, I, I think it tends. I don't tend to ever have written clues that then become visual clues. I tend to, okay, if I take a step back and I go back to having written the story for an individual scenario, that is just every plot beat that needs to happen. And then I think to myself, what evidence can I provide for each of these plot beats? There needs to be solid evidence that this happened. So, for example, if a plot beat is that someone, okay, I think it might be easiest if I actually do it. Can we have spoilers.
I
Uh,
I think so. Like
Yeah,
let's do a spoiler warning for
yeah. Spoiler,
Rise of
spoiler
the
warning.
Golden Idol.
Yeah, I'll use an example from a relatively early scenario in Rise called Garden Retreat. Um, and one of the first big things that you're meant to notice, actually, in this case, slightly unusually, is that there has been a death at all. Because at first glance, it seems like it's just this hippie woman raking her Zen garden, and you can see some kind of struggle has happened inside. But so one of the plot points is that this guy falls out of the window. So I think, okay, what evidence can we have that that has actually happened? And so I think, okay, we'll put a railing along the window and he'll have broken through that. So there's a broken railing. And then I tick that off like, okay, I've got evidence for that plot point of the story.
Okay.
And I go down the whole story, making sure I've got at least one solid piece of evidence for that part of the story. And sometimes if there's a potential alternative, then you need to have kind of negative evidence to show that that didn't happen.
Ah,
Um,
okay, yeah, that's smart. That's smart. Not to lead your players into believing that something happened that in fact didn't really happen.
yeah, although of course sometimes you want them to initially think
Yeah,
something
but
that
that's a
didn't
really
happen.
fine line.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So the
yeah. There's a
process is like you have the story, you outline what kind of evidence and clues you want to get.
mm,
You design it visually and then narratively. So like you do there's no point in time where you're like, oh, let's switch this into like a visual and then like back process
no.
change.
It's just so when I'm thinking what evidence can I use to demonstrate that this plot beat happened, uh, I ideally want that evidence to be something visual, just because it's more fun. It was one of the first things that Ernest and Andreas drummed into us early on is that visual clues are more fun than written clues. So you could have a broken railing, that's something visual that the player can see, or you could have um, a character saying, "Oh, I saw him fall through the railing," and that's just a bit of text on the screen, and it's boring. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so wherever possible, uh, we'll go for visual things, or I certainly will. Um, and yeah, so some things have to be in text. Sometimes it can be difficult, like showing something that happened previously. I know that's a lot of what the Golden Idol games are, but if something happened 3 days ago that's important to the story, that's probably going to have to be like on an answer phone
Yeah.
message or something. Um, although I will say that when I say written stuff is less fun, I think written stuff in like a diary is less fun, but dialogue spoken by characters can still be fun
Yeah. Yeah.
just because it has a bit more personality and
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know why exactly, but it is.
But yeah, like I think the most unfun is like
Mm.
2 pages of text that you need to sit
Yeah,
through, and like you have this cool scene and maybe someone got stabbed or like you don't know what happened, and then you like click on the one thing and it's like, oh, here is like 1,000 words. Go
yeah,
sing it in.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and as I say, it can be difficult because sometimes that's the most naturalistic way to write it because you don't want it to be like okay, the information I need them to know is that someone fell out of a window, and this is a letter from someone to someone else, and it says, "Hi, sister. Barry fell out of a window yesterday. Bye." Like, so
Yeah. I was about to ask you like how much have you managed to like um make to pass the information in a narrative, like written form, but
Mm.
not trying to naturalize it. So like how far can you push this information to be like, okay, it's like it acts as a letter, but actually it's
Yeah.
like two sentences. Like, is it possible to do it, or you really need like this framework of like, hi, how are you doing? I need to tell you
Yeah,
something and blah blah blah.
no,
It's like,
yeah, sure. No, I think it is doable, and I mean, you've got to suspend some disbelief, and
yeah,
it's a game after all. So writing can be gamified somewhat, but you still want it to have the character's voice to it and not sound like it could have been written by anyone. This letter, like,
yeah,
so, yeah, it's a fine line, and I think you know it when you watch testers as well, because you find yourself, we watch all our playtests live, or after a certain point we'll ask testers to record their own videos and send us in, but then we still watch them. We don't just give them the game and give them a form to fill out. We give them a form to fill out as well, actually, but that's not enough. Like, watching them is so key. And one of the things actually is, just if they open a 2-page letter, I'll find myself going, "Oh God, I'm embarrassed at this, the length of this letter. I know it's not good." Like, because you see the game through fresh eyes when you know someone else is playing it,
yeah.
and all of a sudden you realize which bits you're not happy with. Um,
So what do you look for in playtests when you watch them? Watch players play the game.
uh, I look for them primarily to have eureka moments. That's what I mean. That's the ideal situation, and that's why I make these games. Is seeing someone who has been stuck for a little while, but not so long that it gets frustrating, then see something else, or something clicks in their head, and they go, of course, like, shit, yeah, that makes so much sense. That explains why this thing I couldn't figure out earlier happened. Like, that's what we're going for.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but yeah, other things we look for in testing, as I say, in early testing, it's just, are you interested in this scene? Like, um, and yeah, then we're looking at things like, how long does it take them to solve it? If they couldn't solve it, was it a them problem or an us problem? Usually it's an us problem. Like, um,
Yeah, usually it's difficult to hand your testers the game, see them struggle, and conclude, oh, because you suck. That's your
yeah.
problem.
No,
You
yeah, it's
know?
almost always an us problem. I mean, sometimes, like, legitimately, the player just hasn't put two and two together where they really should. But if several players are
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
it,
yeah,
then you probably need to do something else.
yeah, yeah,
And I know other game designers who make kind of, uh, not necessarily deduction games. Some do, but some kinds of puzzle games, and they're adamant, like, they don't care, so long as they know that the puzzle makes logical sense. If the player can't get it, that's on them. But that's just, you want the player to have fun. So
yeah, yeah. There is a balance to strike because like you can have a like a puzzle that could be cool to figure out, but you're
mm,
so eager to help the player to go through it, then you'll pretty much spoil the puzzle by like hinting directly at the solution, which like
yeah,
takes away the joy. So I guess like the playtesting is really like necessary to figure out the balance.
yeah, we actually had an example a bit like that in one of the scenarios I did with Rise. It's one of my favorite scenarios. It's called Border and Brawl, and it's got this big revelation in it, at the end, even though it's a very small scenario. But testers just weren't getting it for whatever reason. Like, every so often, someone would, and when they did, it was a really great moment. But probably only maybe 20% of them were actually getting it. So we added in more and more clues, and then the game comes out, and I still see that scenario and that eureka moment working well for a certain percentage of people whose let's plays I've watched, and I've watched a lot of them. Uh, but then there are others who are just who get it way too quick and too easily, and therefore it doesn't feel like a revelation to them, and that's, yeah, I guess that is a problem with these games, like designing for everyone and every capability.
Yeah. This is so cool when I think about it now. Like, you can have a simple thing turned into eureka moment if you like
Mm,
manage it, right?
mm,
And the other way as well. Like, if you have this, like, if you struggle for a bit and then you find out that something really like how it worked, you're already like,
mm.
oh, that's so cool. But if you
Yeah,
didn't struggle and you just saw this immediately, it's like, oh yeah, that's probably what happened. Like, there's no,
yeah,
you need the
exactly.
struggle for the
Yeah,
right amount of
yeah,
time.
and it needs to be just the right amount of struggle, because yeah, you don't want to be sitting there for an hour unable to figure out how it's happened and just pounding your head against the desk.
Yeah. Have you played Obra Dinn?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a huge inspiration to both the Golden Idol games and my own games. Yeah, I think that's what kind of kicked me off. Oh, actually, it wasn't so much Obra Dinn, it was a video by Game Maker's Toolkit, Mark Brown, which was called something like What Makes a Good Detective Game. And I think in that he was singing the praises of Obra Dinn, and some other ones. And he was also looking at a bunch of detective games and what didn't work about them. And I completely agreed with everything. And that's what sort of started me wanting to make detective games, because um, my background is in kind of point and click adventures, traditional ones, and so I'd always thought I wanted to make point and click adventures. But when I saw that video, I thought, yeah, I want deduction is what I want, and I've been hooked on it ever since.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because like point and click adventure games are about deduction in no small part,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they are, but they often, or at least the ones that I consider to be the best ones, often use cartoon logic.
Yeah.
Um,
Like moon
like
logic.
Yeah, I like to differentiate between moon logic
Okay.
and cartoon logic. Like, I think moon logic people use disparagingly, and it's stuff that just makes no sense whatsoever. And there are plenty of examples in adventure games, the classics like that, where you can't possibly get it without a hint book, and then when you get it, you go, well, how was I meant to know that? That's
How how was
ridiculous.
I supposed to fucking figure it out?
Yeah. Whereas cartoon logic, I think, is perfectly fine. Um, Games like Day of the Tentacle do it great, and I love Day of the Tentacle, and that's the kind of game I grew up playing. And Monkey Island games do it as well. So
Can you give examples?
yeah, like I don't know if this is the best example, but one that springs to mind. In Day of the Tentacle, you play as three different characters. One gets sent in a time machine to the past, one goes to the future, 200 years in the future, 200 years in the past, and one stays in the present. And you can send objects to one another from the past, present, and future. And for some reason, the person in the future needs a tiny little sweater for a hamster, because that's the kind of thing you need in these games. And you have a sweater in the present, and you have a a mountain of coins that you've taken by crowbarring your way into a vending machine. So you put the sweater in the dryer, and then you feed it this mountain of coins, and it runs for 200 years, and it shrinks the sweater down. And then the person in the future who's in the same location, but 200 years in the future, can go up to that dryer, take it out, and it's shrunk so much it now fits a
Oh,
hamster.
nice.
And I love that puzzle. I think it's great. It's silly, obviously, and wouldn't work in real life, but it's got a cartoon logic to it.
Okay.
Um, like, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's not possible really, but
Mm,
you can understand by like extending your uh, rules that you know from like real life into more of
yeah,
like a silly way.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but like moon logic example would be like you take a book and you use two books to like as wings and you fly somewhere. It's
yeah,
just like
exactly.
absurd. Like
Yeah, and I think so. I grew up as Team LucasArts all the way, and Sierra being the rivals. Sorry, Sierra, but Sierra, I just can't play Sierra games because the puzzles are all ridiculous. Like not a single puzzle makes sense as far as I can tell.
yeah, I love I didn't play that much that many adventure games. So but I love watching Day 9, so Sean Plot Day
Yeah.
9 and his show like Mostly Walking, and they
Mm,
play a lot of these games, and they play both like Sierra and LucasArts, and some of the puzzles in like King's Quest games like 5 or 6 is
yeah.
it's like you would need like an entire speech to like say why it's they're funny if you know them afterwards, but like there's no logical reason to like
Yeah.
get them like
Yeah, I think you have to be blinded by nostalgia. But on the other hand, I will say for Sierra, they basically invented the genre, which is still my favorite genre. So fair play. I
why
can't hate on them
why do
too
you
much.
think these games are so like they died out a little bit, right? Like they're definitely not that popular. At some point in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
past, they
they
were like the craze, but why do you think they are still like relevant and there are so many like people that hold them dearly in esteem?
well, first off, if any adventure game nerds watch this, you're going to spark all sorts of comments about, oh, they never really died out. They like this is a big uh, bugbear in those circles. But yeah, certainly they used to be the games that everyone played, and now they're not. I think some people argue that just as many people play them, it's just that now way more people play other sorts of games on top. I don't know if that's true or not. Um, Regardless, I know exactly what you mean, and you're right. So, what is it that endures about them? I think it's a really I don't know if it works. It works. It's a great formula, a great set of mechanics. You can tell any kind of story you like in an adventure game setting, and you can have any kind of puzzles. Well, I guess not any kind, but you can have a lot of different types of puzzles. As I say, you have these more cartoony games like Day of the Tentacle, Sam and Max Hit the Road, but then you have more serious ones like
And
The
about
Dig. Say
oh
again?
the dig. Okay, that's an
Yeah,
older one, but
yeah.
yeah, I said unavowed, so more recent one.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I love Dave Gilbert's stuff with Wadget Eye, particularly the Blackwell series is some of my favorite games. And yeah, so you can have a heartfelt type story as in those games. Yeah, you can tell any kind of story within that mechanical framework, which I think is also true of the Golden Idol games, by the way. It's why I've basically ripped, or why we have ripped off those mechanics, because I think that there should be a thing like Golden Idol likes, like just in the. I'd love it to get to a point where it doesn't feel like you've ripped off those mechanics. It's just like now, if someone makes a point and click adventure, we don't say they've ripped off the mechanics of Monkey Island
Yeah.
because there are so many of them that that's just a genre. and I'd love for Golden Idol likes to become a genre in that same way. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I also think something I love. I don't know whether this is what other people love about point and click adventure games is this sense of time not moving. Like you walk into a scene and then you go away and you do some other stuff and you come back and the same character's there it, doing this, like chopping the same tree he was chopping when you were there 2 hours ago. And there's something very uh I don't know, reassuring about that, I find. Like
I never
um
never thought about it. Never thought about
yeah,
it.
I don't know what I mean and I'm sure that's just born of limitation because I think the trend is just if you have the budget and the time to program something in where he has a whole cycle where he goes off to work or something, people would much rather that, or a lot of people would. But I like that. Yeah, you you get familiar with not just characters and settings, but almost scenes, like which involve characters doing certain things at certain times, and you can always go back to a character and ask the same thing to get the, or at least in a LucasArts game you can. In Sierra, I'm not sure this is true, but you can, yeah, you can always get the relevant bit of information you need again. You're never stuck in a dead end.
Yeah.
I just think it's a great formula.
Yeah, for everybody who is listening who maybe doesn't know this dichotomy, like Sierra Games and LucasArts were rivals, huge rivals, and
Mm,
LucasArts games were the ones where you could like first of all you didn't die in a way like you just die and you
yeah,
should start over the game, and if you didn't save, tough luck, kid. Learn how to save. This is like Sierra Games, and LucasArts were more, let's say, oriented towards like actually you have a puzzle and like you can't break your game. You
yeah,
can always win it, because this was also a fun trope in Sierra Games, where you could just like, oh, you shouldn't have left this item there. Like now you
yeah,
won't win
yeah,
the
yeah,
game, and you won't know. You will you will learn
yeah.
in like 10 hours.
And because yeah, I grew up with LucasArts, as I say, so maybe if I'd played Sierra games first, I'd have been used to that, and then with LucasArts, it would have been a nice improvement. But because I grew up with LucasArts first, then trying to play any kind of Sierra game, no matter how gripping the story looks to me, and stuff. And I've tried in adulthood to play like the Laura Bow games and stuff, and yeah, it's just I was spoiled by LucasArts, I guess.
Have you tried Return to Zork?
No, uh, I may have done as a kid.
So I've so
Just
this
text adventure, right?
so Zork is text adventure, and then
Oh, okay, right.
Return to Zork is the graphical one.
Oh no, I haven't tried that.
So this also is like full of the situations where you did something and you won't win the game now. So like
Mm,
at this point, like you would need like a tutorial opened up on a second monitor, I guess, because like I
yeah,
wouldn't manage. But watching Day 9 and his crew like struggle through this game was so fun. The game is so old and has some such weird tropes in it. It's like fantastical. The world of Zork is like so fantastical and weird at the same time. It's
mm.
so fun. Like it's wild, but I can't imagine playing it right now. But like, wow, I highly
Day nine,
recommend.
Day nine had a great playthrough of some of the early Rise scenarios. Love to see the rest of them. Yeah, those guys are great.
Yeah, they're playing through Rise of the Golden Idol now.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, yeah. The second episode is
Oh,
now. Last week on Monday they released it.
sweet. I'll
Yeah,
have to check that out.
yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Uh, do we have any other things that we want to bring up and talk through?
I mean, I could talk to you about all sorts of things. More recent point and clicks and other games, deduction games.
What do you
In
think?
particular.
What do you think? Like, you said you liked a lot of the older games, LucasArts games, point and click
Mm,
adventure games, and there are a couple of people like Dave Gilbert and
yep.
Ron Gilbert, who, by the way, have exactly the same surname, and they're not related, and it puzzles me to this day. And they both make adventure games.
I think they may have been seen in the same room as one another at one point, though.
But still, like, what do you think people learned over like, oh, I don't know, 30 years of making adventure games? Like, what works in this genre and what doesn't, and what translates to like mystery genre as well?
Yeah, I mean people have certainly iterated on the formula a lot. You know, Wadget Eye being I guess the most successful example, and their games have been very much they they use the 2-click system just left and right, so it's sort of simplified in that way. Whereas Monkey Island, you had the 9 verbs and stuff. Um, People like Francisco Gonzalez makes great games. Lamplight City was a really interesting one. Um,
Lamplight City.
yeah, and he's also working on a game called Rosewater, which should be out soon. Um, yeah, really looking forward to that. But Lamplight City was an interesting one. In that in that game, you didn't have an inventory for one thing.
Okay.
Something that has typically been seen as core to point and click adventure games. Um, you could so it's a detective game and you're investigating various cases, but you could actually progress without solving cases correctly, which is a really interesting concept and something that I think is difficult to make fun, but I think he did it really well in that game. Um, yeah, and others have played with I really like the Notebook formula, which I think is taken from Discworld Noir, but I know it really from the Blackwell games, where you'll learn a piece of information and that will go down as a clue in your notebook. And if you have, say, two, you can then ask people about clues in your notebook. Or if you have two clues that contradict one another, you can kind of pair them together and that will give you a whole new clue.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have ever seen it, but I was working originally on a game called Signal and Echo, which was a point and click adventure. But I was, after having watched those GMTK videos, I was trying to make the puzzles deduction puzzles because, as I say, I grew up really loving these kind of cartoon logic games, but as an adult, like I wanted something more serious. But and so I really enjoyed the Wadget Eye games and Grundislav's games and some other people's, but I tended to find that the trend nowadays is puzzles take a back seat. It's all about story. Players, yeah, don't seem to want these games to be as hard as they once were. And I love puzzles. I'm all about the puzzles. I just don't want them to be cartoony these days. And I think the Blackwell games have some cool puzzles in them, just not that many. Um, and yeah, so I was trying to do something where you could. Firstly, I was telling the player that they needed to take their own handwritten notes, and then you could ask any character in Signal and Echo about any proper noun. So basically, anything capitalized, like a person's name or the name of a building or a location or a book title or the name of a band or anything you came across like that. You could type in and ask uh, other characters about it. You can also search your map for locations that way, and you could search your computer. You played as a journalist, which is what my background is in. And so you could search your computer for old news stories written by the newspaper that had those proper nouns in them. And this was all an attempt to facilitate deduction puzzles, because the big problem with making any kind of deduction game is how the player is going to tell the game that he or she has figured something out. Like, okay, you've realized that, like in Obra for example, if you realize that someone, like person A, was killed by person B using a knife, you can tell the game that it just has slots: who was killed, uh, by whom, and with what. But that's all you can tell the game. If you've realized that, um, say you've got one of these locked room mysteries or something seemingly impossible, and you've realized that the reason someone was able to kill someone in the front carriage of the train when they were all supposedly in the back carriage eating dinner is that actually they snuck onto the roof, climbed all the way along the train, dropped down into the front carriage, and killed him. Like, how do you tell the game that you figured that out? Um, and that's a perpetual problem. That's something that I think Golden Idol solves really well by sort of having these drag and drop phrases, although it's not perfect. And it's something that I was trying to figure out with Signal and Echo, although the problem there was the answer always had to come in the form of a proper noun. Like, actually, I allowed you to ask people about any hotspot name as well. So the answer could come in the form of telling them about a particular hotspot.
So regarding this, uh, I think there was one attempt, but it was flaky at best. You could use LLM to handle like unconstrained input, and then
Like a chat GPT
yeah,
or something.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I've had this thought. Yeah, yeah.
And then like it will be tricky because like you can't like guarantee the confidence, and
Yeah,
this is what you lose. But if you manage to constrain it with like the system prompt underneath, it would
yeah,
be interesting that you have like your own computer or like even like a robot friend where you can
mhm,
say whatever, and if this matches what really happened, you can have like, yeah, that's true.
absolutely. I've actually tried to create something like this just using chat GPT. Like, I'm not technical. I wouldn't be able to actually program something like this, but I've tried to just have a conversation with chat GPT and tell it, this is the kind of game I'm making with you now. Uh, Here's the mystery, and here's the answer. The next person that types is going to be the player, and their job is to tell you the answer. Chat GPT, can you please respond to the player, telling them if they've got it right or wrong? And if they've got it wrong, tell them why their solution doesn't make sense. I've experimented with it a little to varying degrees of success. Um, but I do wonder about when ChatGPT and its equivalents get better, whether that could be used in that way, because that's the ideal thing. Like, if I'm having a play test, so sometimes with the Golden Idol games, we have early play tests where we haven't built the scroll puzzle yet. The scroll puzzle being like the words with blank spaces in that the player has to slot other words into. So it will say blank killed blank with a blank, and the player has to say Mr. Smith killed John Doe with a knife. Um, but sometimes we haven't built those yet. We just show the player the scenario and say, "What do you think happened here?" Um, and that's almost the ideal way to play it, really, because we can then tell them, "Yeah, you're right about this bit, but you said that he killed him at lunchtime, but we know that he was at lunch with his friend over here or whatever. Yeah, that almost like a kind of Dungeons and Dragons kind of way to play it. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons, but like where you have a, what do they call it? Who's the master?
Dungeon master or game master, yeah.
And yeah. So if you have a dungeon master or a game master, that's almost the ideal way to play
Yeah,
these games.
yeah.
And actually, some of the other writers who came on board at the same time as me to work on Rise, they have podcasts which are like mystery podcasts where they basically do just that. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but with a
Oh.
murder scenario.
So they are the ChatGPT in this regard who
Yeah,
they
exactly.
know what happened, and they're like, yeah, but this couldn't happen because of that, and they are doing
Yeah.
this. Nice. Okay, what's the podcast? What are the
Yeah, I
podcast
was going to say I should probably give them a plug.
called?
So one is called Aurelius Whitlock's Murder Museum, and the other is called Solve This Murder. So they actually have various podcasts like Escape This Podcast and
Okay.
did I say Solve This Murder?
So
Yeah, I should probably check this after the
if you
podcast.
send me the links
Yeah,
afterwards, I will put them in
yeah, I will
description.
do.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. It was really cool discussion. I really like it, unlocked a couple of things in my mind. I didn't think about it before this way. Like especially the thing, it's still haunting me. This like the mystery is much more cool if it's like almost impossible. Like
It is to me.
to me, it is now to me as well.
Yeah, good. I'm glad I've got you on board.
This is so cool. Okay, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun.
And good luck on the City Voices. Keep us in loop where
Thanks.
people can follow the development.
I think the best place probably is Twitter and Blue Sky. You can follow me at games_Kini. Just look up Kini Games, Kini. And then yeah, obviously the Steam page will give you more information about what's already known about City of Voices.
Yeah, we'll put this also in the description for everybody who is interested.
Thanks very much. Go check out Matt's beautiful art.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Game Engineering Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and follow on Spotify and other podcasting platforms. See you in the next episode.